quick heads up, this video is part of a 3-part kinda series of guides all focusing on the pen decks supported in Agov, except Hungry Burger. So depending on which one this video is, either go to the channel page to watch the others or subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. And as always, I am not omniscient yet, so there will be a pinned comment down below if I want to add anything in post. While the support in Age of Overlord certainly gives other decks a huge buff, it was mainly made as Zarc support, and support it sure did, making pure Zarc a coherent deck for the first time in, ever. And if that wasn't surprising enough, pure Supreme Kings are now the first ever New Age Midrange Pendulum deck, which I'm sure will make Twitter very happy. Having low engine and X-card combo count requirements while in exchange ending on relatively weaker boards. The deck also happens to be extremely cheap to a point where this will be the only one of the 3 guides to just not have a budget options section. I will also mention that pure Zarc is genuinely the weakest of the 3 options to play, but in exchange we get to look at this, so it balances out. Talking about sections, the ones for this video are gonna be the basic combos for turn 1, follow-up Handtrap countering and extensions first, cause the rest hardly makes sense without the context given by that, followed by the actual sample deck, and afterwards some gameplay. Okay, starting off with our basic combo, we will use a Dragon Shrine and any normal summonable monster. This deck can combo with basically any 2 of its engine cards, but in a scenario where we specifically draw Dragon Shrine or Foolish Burial, you don't even need the second engine card, it can also just be any normal summon. So we'll do this because it requires the least amount of engine, and we will start off with just activating Dragon Shrine, sending a dragon from deck to grave, which is gonna be Supreme King Dragon Dark One. And we can immediately use its effect next. If you control no monsters, we can summon it back from the graveyard. To then use its on summon effect, if it is normal or special summon, it will add a Supreme King Gate card from deck to hand, which in this case will be Supreme King Gate Magician. Next we can scale Supreme King Gate Magician and use its Pendulum effect. It will destroy itself and then scale another Supreme King Gate monster from our deck. So we will do just that and scale a Supreme King Gate 0. Don't worry about its effects, they won't come up in this. Next we normal summon the normal summonable monster and link it and Darkworm away into Beyond the Pendulum. Use its effect, pay 1200 life points, add any pendulum from deck to hand at the cost of locking ourselves out of monster card effects until we pendulum summon. So with Beyond we add Supreme King Dragon Lightworm, scale it up and then perform a pendulum summon of Darkworm and Magician. Now we can use Magician's effect, the Beyond lock isn't active anymore because we pendulum summoned, and add any spell or trap card that mentions Supreme King Zarc from deck to hand, which will be Soul of the Supreme Celestial King. We will set it and... oh, pass. As I said before, this is a mid-range deck in the truest sense of the word. You end on just cards with no effect. But this board does include more interruption than appears, so we will pass to our opponent, they will make some plays, and as soon as they put cards on the field you would like to not be there anymore, we can activate Soul, tribute a Pendulum spellcaster with 2500 original attack, and then banish from deck, grave, hand or extra deck the materials listed to summon Supreme King Zarc. Now, the materials needed for him are 4 dragon monsters, 1 of each card type, so Pendulum Xyz Synchro Fusion. But the reason we use these very specific ones is not just because I want to roleplay the anime, but because Soul says that if we don't have 1 each of a Fusion, Synchro, Xyz and Pendulum Dragon in the name, not as a card type, it's German but you can tell it says Fusion Dragon, Zarc's effects will be negated. So we want to make sure that we use the proper materials, or if we don't, at least already have the proper materials banished. Now, for the sake of the rest of the video, any cards that have Fusion, Synchro, Xyz or Pendulum Dragon in the name I will refer to as Dimension Dragons, because I don't want to have to say that every single time. Which Dimension Dragons we use specifically isn't relevant for this combo right now. We will talk about that later in the deck profile. Because there's multiple Fusion Dragons and one of them is going to be slightly more optimal, but for this specific replay it doesn't matter, so ignore which specific Dimension Dragons I'm sending, just notice that I am sending some. Right, so after we finished that ordeal of activating a single trap card, we can use Zarc's effect. Now, first of all, Zarc cannot be destroyed or targeted by your opponent's card effects and has 4000 in both stats, so he's probably just gonna sit there for a while, but also he has an on-summon effect that says, well, destroy all cards your opponent controls. So they're basically back to 0. But if they do end up being able to play further, we can also activate Lightworm's effect. If a monster is special summoned while Zarc is on the field, it can special summon itself from the Pendulum scale, and then pick itself and another Pendulum monster you control, and then copy one of the monster's level and attribute to the other. So we will copy Darkworm's Dark attribute onto Lightworm, which will be relevant in a second, and use Lightworm's on-summon effect. If it is summoned, we can add a Supreme King Gate or Dragon from extra deck back to hand, and then immediately synchro or XZ-summon a Supreme King Dragon monster from the extra deck. So we'll sync up Lightworm and Darkworm, and summon from extra deck a Supreme King Dragon Clearing. Now, the attribute copy mattered because Clearing needs a Dark attribute non-tuner, so we had to copy that attribute over to Lightworm. And now we can use the on-summon effect of Clearing, which will destroy all monsters your opponent controls. So as you can see, this deck is way less focused on negates, at least as a baseline. We will get negates in a little while, don't worry about that. But at the baseline, it's just focused on, yep, destroy. It is just gone, put your cards away. Now, this is it in terms of interruption for the very baseline. As I said, this deck doesn't end on very much with just the basic of basic combos. But while we're in this situation, we can also look at the follow-up real quick. Now, follow-up is of course a weird way to show in combos because I don't know what the fuck my opponent's gonna do. But some things worth mentioning are, as I said before, Zarc is pretty likely to stick around. So if he does, you can, on your next turn, if you want to, tribute in to summon a Archray from your extra deck. Now, Archray on summon will scale any Pendulum card from your deck. And if your opponent decides to negate that, it is most likely linked to a negate and destroy. Archray actually puts itself into the Pendulum zone. Now you have scales from 0 to 13, so you can just do everything you want. But a thing I like to do with showing follow-up is assume like the worst possible scenario, and that was just as unrealistic as it is, your opponent banishing all your cards face down. Evenly matched, but you have to banish all of them somehow. Because fun fact, just from this follow-up that we added back with Lightworm right now, we actually have a full OTK. So if your opponent passes back to you, I will even ignore the top deck we get and the other cards in hand we should have. We can just scale the Gate Magician, use its effect again, pop itself to scale a Gate 0. And now what's interesting is Lightworm actually has an effect face up in the extra deck. If a Pendulum monster you control is destroyed while it is in the extra deck, you can actually add it back to hand. Which means we can now normal summon it, use its effect, add Gate Magician back to hand. Next we can use Gate Magician's special summon effect. We can send a Dimension Dragon from extra deck or hand to the graveyard to special summon itself from the hand. We're gonna do just that. Once again, this is just any Dimension Dragon. Which one specifically doesn't matter right now. And we can use Gate Magician's on summon effect again. Search any spell or trap card which lists Zarc in its effect text, which in this case is gonna be Wings of Light. Now you could also, we'll go over this a little bit later in the deck profile section, add a Pendulum Evolution, but that requires more cards, so we will just go with Wings of Light for now. Next we can link up our two monsters into another copy of Beyond the Pendulum, use its effect again, add our second copy of Lightworm. We can scale that up, activate Wings of Light. Wings of Light will add to our hand any Supreme King Gate or Dragon monster. We will add a second copy of Gate Magician. Now, unfortunately, the set isn't actually released yet, and I could only pick up one Gate Magician until now, so you're just gonna have to pretend that this is a Gate Magician. And what we can do next is Pendulum Summon our Gate Magician from extra deck, our Darkworm from extra deck, and the second Gate Magician from hand. Next we can use Beyond's second effect. If two monsters are Pendulum summoned to her arrows with different levels, we can target two cards on the field and destroy them. And we can chain to that our on-summon effect of Darkworm again, adding a Supreme King card from deck to hand. Now this doesn't actually matter for the ODK, it just means you get to chain block your Beyond the Pendulum, and you get some follow-up in case the OTK fails. Now what we can do from here is overlay our two level 7s to summon an All Absolute Dragon from our extra deck. Next we just link everything away, Dark Worm, Beyond, and the Absolute Dragon into a 3-material Appaloosa. Now, Absolute Dragon's effect is gonna activate if it is sent to the graveyard. We can summon any Odd Eyes monster from our extra deck, which in this case is gonna be Odd Eyes Rebellion Xyz Dragon, which is, once again, it's not this card. Mine haven't arrived yet, so I'm gonna put it on screen. You're just gonna pretend this is the right card. But thankfully, its effects don't even matter right here, because it's just gonna be Xyz material for Overlord. We can summon Overlord using any one Rebellion Xyz monster as material, and the fun part is if we used a rank 7, it can actually attack 3 times with 3000 attack. So from just this, wherever it is, 1 Gate Magician we had as follow-up, we ended up popping 2 cards with Beyond, making a 3-material Appaloosa and having enough attack points for game. Okay, now that we have looked at the basic combo, we can start looking into extension and Handtrap prevention in quotation marks. It's more that you just play through them in this case. Now, if you look at any modern Pendulum deck, Beyond is basically asking to be hand-trapped, but actually you will like your Beyond getting hand-trapped, because Beyond getting hand-trapped is probably, ironically, the easiest to play around, though there are a few ways for us to play through like an Ash or a Vele or an Imperm on this Beyond. The easiest one would, of course, to just draw the target. We have a lot of access to this card, so there's a very good chance that we just draw it, but this would be boring. Another way to play through it is also just by having another copy of a Gate Magician lying around somewhere. Even way more likely than having the Light Worm, because we play a lot more ways to get to this. What we can do here is we use Gate's special summon effect again, send a Dimension Dragon from extra deck to graveyard to summon it. But we actually won't use its on-summon effect. We could, of course, on-summon effect, get Rings of Light get Light Worm, and then we have our scales, but we won't get the trap that way. But one thing you might not realize, so that is actually extremely funny, is we can link away our Gate Magician and our Beyond, and yeah, that card isn't hard once per turn, you can just make another one. Which of course is extremely funny, you just add your Light Worm, and there we are, as if nothing ever happened. Now, Beyond may not be as big of a choke point as one would originally think. There's another card in this deck with a pretty big target painted on its head, which is Gate Magician. Because if your Gate Magician gets hand-trapped and you don't get your search, you of course not only lose out on your Zarc, but if you control no Zarc, you can't use Light Worm's effect, which means you effectively lose out on all your interruption. You can of course still use your 2 monsters and your Beyond to make a 3-material Appaloosa, but ending on nothing but a 3-material Appaloosa is suboptimal. So we should come up with some ways to make sure our Gate Magician resolves guaranteed, and there are actually a couple of ways to achieve that. Now, the easiest one is to just have another copy in hand, which will then change our plays a little bit. We will still Pendulum summon both our monsters from our extra deck. Once again, this is a second Gate Magician, please pretend. But we will not Pendulum summon the Gate Magician from hand, because what we want to do now is we want to make a negate before we summon and use our Gate Magician. To do that, we will link away our other Gate Magician and our Beyond into an Xyz. Xyz's effect activates, which will add a Pendulum monster from extra deck back to our hand, so add back the Gate Magician, and then we can use the second effect of Xyz to special summon a Pendulum monster from hand or graveyard with a level between our Pendulum zones. So we will just summon back the Gate Magician, we just add it back to hand, and then we can use the Gate Magician and we can use the Xyz to make an Appaloosa. Now we can use the Gate Magician effect in hand to special summon itself by sending a Dimension Dragon from extra deck, summon it, and then add the trap from here. And of course, if your opponent wants to Vela us here or Ash us here, we have an Appaloosa to protect us from that. Now there is one other way to make sure you're safe against hand traps. In this case specifically something like Imperm. It of course requires even more engine. In this case we will need another level 7 as well, but it can even be your quote-unquote Garnet, a card you don't really want to draw, as long as it's a level 7. So what we do from here is we Pendulum summon our 2 monsters again from extra deck, as well as the level 7 from our hand. The Gate Magician once again still stays. And what we can do from here is once again overlay our 2 level 7s to summon another Absolute Dragon. Next we will once again link everything away into a 3-material Appaloosa, and Absolute activates to summon Vortex Dragon from extra deck. Now Vortex Dragon is an Omni Negate by shuffling a face-up Pendulum monster from your extra deck back into your deck. And now that we have a Monster Negate and an Omni Negate, we can very safely special summon our Gate Magician and add the trap to our hand. Now you will notice that we do not have a target for Light Worm anymore, because we tribute this one and then we don't have a Pendulum. But in exchange, you get your Omni Negate and you get to make sure, like absolutely sure that your Gate Magician resolves. Which is more important than maybe having the second Raigeki. Now there's one additional way to make something like this that I kind of want to mention, just really quickly at the side, is that if we rewind a little, this time I won't bother properly stacking the deck and everything, you can make your board a little bit stronger by having another Pendulum monster face up in your extra deck. So if I just put a Dark Worm in there, let's not think about how it got there. This is just in case there is another one, you can make this a little bit stronger. You can use these two, and before you make your Appaloosa and stuff, you can actually make an Exceed. Exceed adds the level 7 back to hand and summons it. And then we can overlay these two and make an, if I can find it, Absolute Dragon, and then use Absolute and the Exceed to get your Appaloosa, and your Absolute will get you your Vortex Dragon. And then of course you can summon the Gate Magician. If I were to do this with the hand we had last time, we wouldn't have a card in extra deck face up right now, which means we wouldn't have something to shuffle back with Vortex Dragon, which means our Omni Negate wouldn't be live, right? Which means you can only do this line specifically where you get to keep your Light Worm activation if you have another Pendulum monster in your face up extra deck. Of course, if you have other things to Pendulum summon and stuff like that, you can also go from there. But this was just to show the least requirements for all the stepping stones to play through Handtraps. Now for the actual deck, we start off with 2 copies of Darkworm. You can increase this to 3, but first of all we have like a million ways to get there. And we have another normal summon that's very good, and we would rather play 3 of them. We don't want to break on like 20 normal summons in hand. So 2 I think is the ideal ratio, but you can play 3 if you want to. Next we have 3 Dragon Shrine and 1 Foolish Burial, because that's just Darkworm but better. Why would we not max out on that? Afterwards we have 3 Gate Magician. You do of course always search this with Darkworm and your other normal summon, but having one in hand is also fine. For once, because if the card meant to search this gets negated, you have it in hand. And second, because if you already have one, the other one in your hand becomes an extender, so you can make Beyond with that, or a second Beyond if your first one gets interrupted. Next we have 2 Gate Zero. It isn't bad to draw, like it plus Darkworm is combo, because you only need a gate in your Pendulum scale to special summon Gate Magician. But the reason we run 2 specifically instead of 1 is just the OTK combo I showed at the start of the video. Next we have 3 Rings of Light, it's just Rhoda, so why would you not play 3 of that? Now keep in mind that if you do control Zarc, you can also special summon the target from the deck, which means that during the opponent's turn you can activate this to summon Lightworm to use its Quick Synchro effect if you maybe couldn't set up the scale Lightworm. Talking of Lightworm, of course we play 2 of that as well. 2 of it because we kinda don't really have a lot of high scales we can use. It kinda is the only one. So if we only play 1 of that, we are gonna get kinda fucked most of the time. After that we have the other normal summon I was talking about, which is gonna be Skullcrobat Joker. In terms of being a normal summon, kinda just strictly better than Darkworm, because it not only gets access to Supreme King Gate Magician, but can also get access to some other cards, including Oddeyes Revolution Dragon. The Revolution Dragon isn't a card you have to play, you can actually play anywhere from 0 to 3 copies of this. The arguments in favor are that it is just a Rhoda for Darkworm, you can discard it to add a level 8 or lower Dragon type Pendulum monster from your deck to hand, which of course includes Darkworm and Lightworm. But we already have so many Darkworm in deck, and another normal summon as well, that maybe adding a Darkworm from deck to hand isn't all that beneficial. I'm playing 1 copy right now, because it makes Joker get access to Lightworm. So I have another way to get access to a high scale, but once again you can just cut this if you want to. Next we have Soul of the Supreme Celestial King, pretty self-explanatory, we kind of need that to get to Zarc. Next we have 1 copy of Pendulum Evolution. This isn't technically necessary, but it helps a lot for like OTKing and also consistency, because it does search Supreme King Gate Magician. Next is Pendulum Dragon. This is of course the Pendulum Dimension Dragon for the Supreme King Trap card. There only exist 2 Dragon-type Pendulum Dragon monsters, which are Pendulum Dragon and the regular Oddeyes Pendulum Dragon. Pendulum Dragon is technically very slightly better, because it has a better scale but it comes up so astronomically rare that you can just save yourself the money and run regular All Pendulum Dragon instead. Next we have an Astrograph Sorcerer. This also isn't necessary, this is just an option you can run. It's nice because it triggers off Supreme King Gate Magician, you can search it with Pendulum Evolution, and it just gives you some extra value. Makes your like 2-card combos have the resources of a 3-card combo, which is pretty cool. Afterwards, the rest of the deck is just plain non-engine. There are no particular non-engine cards that are really great in this deck. Usually for Pendulum decks, non-engine cards that summon a monster to your side of the field, like Talons, Fenrir, or Nibiru, are really good. But because Dragon Shrine conflicts directly with Nibiru and Fenrir, maybe those two aren't as great in here as they usually would be. Talons is still a really good one though, but considering this is already a budget deck, something like Talons isn't necessary. Just play any good non-engine cards like Ashes, Velas, all that good stuff. Now for the extra deck, we have 2 Beyond. Usually you just make 1 turn 1 and 1 turn 3, but as we saw earlier, if you get Handtrap on your first one, you can just make a second one. After that, we of course play Exceed to link climb further into Appaloosa. After that, we have Vortex Dragon and Absolute Dragon for either negates or OTK setups, Clearing for the extra interruption, Overlord for OTKs, then 2 copies of All Rebellion Exceed Dragon, one of which we actually want to summon, the other's just another card to send off Supreme King Gate Magician. After that, we have Zarc and Archway. Now Archway, you technically don't have to play, but look at it and tell me you don't want to play it. And the last 3 cards in our extra deck are the 3-dimension dragons we used to summon Zarc. Now for Fusion Dragons, it's basically just whichever Super Poly target you want to run, even if you don't play Super Poly. Starving Venom might be the best one. Like all the Fusion Dragons we cannot actually summon without something like Super Poly, so it doesn't really matter. Now for the Synchro Dragons, Clearing is the only one we can actually hypothetically summon with like an Ash Blossom plus a level 4, but it will not come up, it will not matter. And for Xyz Dragons, the original Dark Rebellion Xyz Dragon and the All Rebellion Xyz Dragon are both summonable by this deck, but we already play 2 Rebellion Xyz, so we might as well switch it up and play the other one we could hypothetically summon. And then just to list some more options, you can, instead of playing Soul of the Supreme Celestial King, play Soul of the Supreme King, the old Zarc trap, which summons Zarc at the cost of nothing, no extra garnets and banishing, instead just half of your life points. But in exchange, the Zarc on your field gets negated, but you can prevent that with the Sulfur Cord Link 3, which unnegates your Pendulum monsters. It says the effects of Pendulum monsters it points to cannot be negated. So you summon Zarc to her zone, the trap would negate Zarc's effect, but she says Zarc cannot be negated, so Zarc resolves. This of course has the advantage that you don't need to play like 5 dead extra deck slots, but in exchange you need to specifically end on the Sulfur Cord Link 3. And then one other cool card you can play is Chronograph with Time Gazer, which just means you have a slightly higher high scale count, which is pretty nice because we have 2 high scales in our deck right now, as well as being another extender to play through interruptions better. Yeah, so remember how the Supreme King cards played a pretty big role in a certain incident a while back? Well, it turns out searching any fusion spell in the game for free can still break the game using a Predaplant engine as well as other things to end on boards that can be considered information hazards. So if you're interested in the irredeemable unholy, you can join the Zarc deck Discord server below.